Hey everybody, my name is Rob Wu, CEO and one of the co-founders of Cosvox. You're also here with Kenny Sigler, our guest speaker today. Super excited about what Kenny has to say. I spoke with Kenny 3 months ago, and then again since I could not get enough uh, time with Kenny and his wonderful insights. And we chatted about development, about fundraising, about major gifts, about capital campaigns, a lot of great stuff. And we decided to put together a special webinar for our audience today around development audits, especially as we head into the end of Q4, the beginning of 2023, having a great plan, having a great strategy to not only wrap up your year strong, but also to look forward in terms of what you want to adjust and figure out the gaps and opportunities is super important. So I'm really excited to have Kenny here. While we're getting people signed on, since we'll be starting in just about a minute or two, just a few housekeeping items to start. One, this session is being recorded. So if you have lunch to jump off to or another meeting or whatever else, feel free to do that. You have full flexibility. We will send you a recording of this webinar, but don't go away too soon because we will have a great section at the end of our webinar on questions that you can ask Kenny, and then he'll get to those at the end of our session. What else is there? We are on video as well as audio, and Kenny will be showing some of his slides soon. You will be getting a copy of not only his slides in PDF format to review with you and your team, but also there's some special resources Kenny is going to send over. I believe there's kind of a 7-step cheat sheet of some kind. So I'm really excited about what Kenny has to share with you as well. Without further ado, Kenny, I would love for you to take away this presentation and share your slides as well. But before you do that, actually I have one more item, is that we want to make this session interactive. So if you have any questions at any time, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom app, or to use the chat tool as well. I will be moderating the Q&A section as part of this webinar. So feel free to send any questions that you have. But in the meantime, as we get started, just 2 questions. One is, who are you? Where are you calling in from? And what is your #1 development problem you have today? So feel free to chat that in. It's a great way to just kind of kick this thing off, so Kenny really knows kind of what you're thinking about, what your challenges are, and also feel free to send in your questions. All right, Kenny, why don't you take it away from here?
All right, thanks, Rob. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Let me go ahead and share my screen and get my slideshow going. All right. Well, first, thank you for having me, Rob, and thank you for everyone that's joining in. And if you've signed up for a development audit webinar, you're my kind of people. That's not really an appealing topic for a lot of folks. I'm sure that if you have how to maximize your special event and how you do some other topics, they might be more popular, let's say. But if you've signed up for a webinar on development audits, you're my kind of people. I love development audits, and we'll talk a lot about them today. But what I want to start with is I want to give you sort of an outline of what we're going to cover during our time together today. And so you can see what we'll cover. And I agree with Rob. Please feel free to chime in and submit your questions. We have time built in at the end of the presentation to go over as many questions as we have time for. But today I want to cover a number of things. And these sort of encapsulate sort of the most common questions that I receive whenever someone's talking about a development audit. They want to know, what is a development audit? When should I consider having an audit? And so part of that is, am I ready to have an audit? We're going to talk about the most common gaps that we uncover when we conduct a development audit for an organization. And like Rob said, we're going to talk about how you can conduct your own checkups every year in between audits. And we have a neat little handout that'll help guide you through that process. So those are the things that we're going to cover today, and I'm excited to get into it. But first, we'll go through this pretty quickly. Who am I? I've worked with nonprofits for over a decade now. I worked for a consulting firm where we helped a lot of nonprofits. I was a part of that process. I ran a development office for a nonprofit. I helped raise money for an academic medical center. And today I am very grateful to help nonprofits with their fundraising as a solo practitioner and have my own fundraising consulting business. And, as I've been in fundraising, one thing to know about me is I've always been very data and process oriented. That's who I am. It's one of the reasons I don't do special event fundraising. They're a little too chaotic and messy for me. I've been there, done that. I have a ton of respect for people that can pull off tremendous fundraising events. More power to them. That's not my wheelhouse. Very data and process oriented. And I was the kind of person that always looked forward to performance reviews, right? I always loved getting that feedback. I want to know what I'm doing. I want to know what's working. What do I need to continue doing? And what are some areas that I can improve on? I always welcomed that feedback. Now, to my office fans out there, I wouldn't say I was as eager for my performance reviews as, let's say, Dwight Schrute. I wasn't quite that intense when it came to my performance reviews, but I did like them. I looked forward to the opportunity to learn so that I can make better, more informed decisions. And ultimately, that's what an audit is. And it's why it's one of my core services that I provide to nonprofits: feasibility studies, capital campaigns, capacity building campaigns, development audits, very process, data-driven services. So what is an audit? It's a number of things. Essentially, an audit is a thorough analysis of your organization's development audits to identify strengths, gaps, and really create recommendations for you to get from where you are to where you need to be. And that's why it's a physical is a good analogy for a development audit. You don't go to the doctor's office and get a physical and you walk out a healthier person, right? That's not how that works. But a physical is an important first step to get knowledge about what's going on inside of your body so that you can make better, healthier decisions with that information. That's what an audit is. It is not a punishment. A lot of times if you're being audited, that's not always a good thing. But this is not a punishment. And an audit is not designed to uncover dirt, right? It's not a process designed to figure out what exactly you're not doing right. It is, it really is like a feasibility study in that my job is never to tell you what you can't do or what you're doing wrong. My job is always to help you figure out how to get from where you are to where you want to be. So an audit's not designed to uncover dirt or highlight the negative. It's to assess where you are and try to figure out what steps are needed to get to where you want to be. An audit is also a good habit to have. You don't need one every single year, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but just like having a routine physical is a good habit to have to benefit your health, a development audit is a good habit to have. And one last thing about what a development audit is, an audit is customized to fit your organization. I'm going to hammer home the physical analogy here, but a physical for someone who is in their early 30s with no pre-existing health conditions, who's not a smoker, is going to look different than a physical for someone who is in their mid-50s with a family history of cardiovascular disease. Physicals change depending on who they're evaluating and what the context is. An audit is the same way. An audit should be customized and tailored to fit what stage of life your organization is in. And so another question that I get often is, when should I do it? How do I know if I'm ready to have an audit for our organization? It would probably be easier just to make a list of when not to do an audit. That might be shorter, but these are some of some experiences that I've had around when you would do an audit. It's when even if you've never had one before, or if you have had one, let's say before COVID, that might be a good time to do an audit. And if you are a new chief development officer or a development director, if you're new to an organization, a development audit could be a great way to get to know what you're walking into. That's a quote I had from one development director that called and wanted an audit. And they said, I need to know exactly what I'm walking into. So if you can come do an audit, I'll know quickly what steps I need to take as I move into my new role with a new organization. I love doing an audit either in preparation for or at the end of a strategic planning process. On the front end, an audit can give you some really good data that you can use to inform decisions during your strategic planning process. You know exactly what's going on in your development office, and you can set realistic goals year over year for your strategic plan. It also works on the back end. I've come in after strategic plans have been completed and an organization knows exactly where they want to be in 3 to 5 years, and they're trying to figure out how do we get from where we are to where we need to be. And the first good step is to do an audit. Sometimes you know what you want to accomplish, but you need an objective third party to come in and evaluate what's going on and provide some empirical data to help you make changes that you want to make within your development office. Maybe you have an executive director or a CEO who's questioning maybe some strategies, or you want to try to help your board or development committee move in a certain direction. Well, having the right data, the right information to inform those decisions can help move a group of people or leadership in a certain direction. If you find that you're not quite gaining a lot of traction with your donors, if your annual fund goals are not being met within a few years, a development audit's a great way to dig down and find some root causes of where you're not gaining traction and some ways to improve that. And lastly, if you anticipate having a capital campaign in a few years, a development audit's a good way to find out exactly what you need to do to start preparing for the campaign. Campaigns are capital campaigns and other major gift campaigns are won and lost really in the years leading up to the campaign itself. And so how you build those relationships and the infrastructure that you have in your development office in the 3 to 5 years leading up to a campaign and how well you build those relationships really makes all the difference in the world when it comes time to launch a capital campaign. So that's what an audit is. It is when you might consider having an audit. And now we're going to talk about the 3 most common gaps that I see when I come alongside an organization and conduct an audit. It is really a partnership. When I conduct a development audit, it's not like the IRS coming in and cracking down on things that you're doing. This is really a partnership to understand where you are, what you're trying to accomplish with an audit, where you want to be, and using an audit as a useful tool to get you there, to outline the steps and the critical issues to get you where you're trying to be. The 3 common gaps that I see in a lot of audits is an organization using the wrong data, or sometimes perhaps no data at all. They have an inadequate annual fund development plan, and they have an underutilized development committee. So for each of these 3 areas, what we're going to do is we're going to dive deeper into each one. We're going to talk about why those issues exist and talk about some potential solutions to address those gaps. And the first one is using the wrong data or no data at all. And why is that the case? Why do so many development offices struggle with data? I've been there. There's a lot of reasons. One is time. It just takes a lot of time to uncover data, to try to figure out what it is that you want to measure. And while you're out building relationships with donors and working on your next annual fund appeal, your newsletter, you got a board meeting to get ready for, time is really one of the critical issues there. Another critical issue is having the right software to help pull out some of that data. Now, I remember when I first got started that The issue around software used to be that there wasn't a user-friendly software out there that you could use to pull the right data that you needed, and it would export it in a way that you could actually understand it. If you did find it, you couldn't afford it. Chances are you couldn't afford the data that actually had all the tools that you needed for it to have. So that was the problem then. Fast forward to where we are today, that's really not the issue. The issue today is that there are so many softwares competing for our attention, promising to do this, this, and that. It's almost like we're paralyzed by the amount of options and choices that we have, competing for our attention. It's much different than the way it used to be. I recognize that I'm not the software expert in the room here, and that's why Rob and I have had such great conversations over the past several months, is because he really understands software really well and the needs of nonprofits. So at this point, Rob, can you share some good advice with the audience about some of the challenges that nonprofits face with their software?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I've been on a 3-month sprint of just talking to a whole bunch of development folks, capital campaigns, major donor gift officers, and I spoke with about 100 people within 3 months. So it's been really interesting to see some of the patterns. One of the common things that folks always tell me is that they pull data out of their existing systems because their systems don't work. So they may have a database or a newsletter system or something else, but those systems just haven't been designed for the specific work of either major gifts or capital campaigns or a lot of the development stuff that folks need to do. So they end up just building their own homegrown Excel spreadsheets to really run their fundraising operations, which becomes very difficult. So that's one interesting thing that I've learned. And one of the things we're doing here at CosVox is we're incubating a new product idea called Morningside, where it's really geared towards major gift officers and those who touch major gifts, where it's streamlined the whole workflow, what they need to do from prospecting to cultivation to payments and fulfillment. So really interested about that. And we're focusing on that. And if anybody here is in our audience today, is interested in chatting about some of the workflows related to major gifts, then I'll be happy to have a conversation with you. But when it comes to kind of traditional software, we think about if you're not happy with your products that you use, there's a few steps that you can take. So the first is taking inventory of what you already use. So making a list of, okay, here are the products that I'm actually paying for, or products that we're actually utilizing, creating a giant list, having basically a spreadsheet of the names of the software, the cost that you're paying for per year, and then having 2 additional data pieces. The first one being, how much do you use the software? Giving a 1 out of 5 rating, 5 being the highest utilization when you ask your team, 1 being the lowest. So having that column, and then the other column is the perceived benefit. So taking each piece of software, ranking it as well, 5 being highest, 1 being lowest. So then you have this inventory of the different pieces of software you're actually using. So you have that in one place. From there, you can actually say, oh, we're actually not using this. It's low benefit, it's high cost. So let's figure out a different solution. Or it's low benefit, low cost, then maybe we should continue using it. So you can begin to take a look at the scoring to figure out, okay, what are some low-hanging fruit pieces of products that we don't want to use anymore, and let's just cross it out very easily. Let's cancel it. So after that, you want to take a look at determining what are your needs lists. So create like a short list of, okay, here are the top things we really want a piece of software to do, and then using that as a requirement stock to go out there and find alternatives. So this is where you can evaluate, take a look at other pieces of software, whether it be a major gifts workflow platform like what we're building, or existing CosVox, which is our digital fundraising tools for peer-to-peer fundraising. You can take a look. One of the key things that I recommend is when you are evaluating what could be a good solution to jump off to, typically the beginning of the year is a great time to do it, since it's a little slower when it comes to fundraising, as well as you creating your fundraising plans. You can actually build in adoption and transition and migration into it, as well as you can build in some budget too. But taking a look at if there's a strong trial for you to poke around so you can see, okay, is this something that can really benefit our organization, or do I have to actually sign a contract before I even touch a piece of software, which is a huge red flag in my opinion. So taking a look at that, taking a look at the education and support that comes alongside of it, as well as how easy it is for staff to use. Because if it's not easy, then it doesn't get adopted, then it becomes just a giant waste of money and time for a lot of folks. So those are some tips that I have in terms of taking folks through an evaluation framework on their pieces of software that they have.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I love the idea of even if it's a simple task, but taking inventory of what you already have, what you're paying for, and a description of what that is. Because when you said that, a light bulb went off for me that how many times I'm doing an audit and I ask a software related question and they start scrambling to find, well, we kind of use this. I think we use it for that. I'm not sure if we're paying for this anymore. We kind of used it and it just seems like it's a bit of a mess. So taking inventory of exactly what you have, what you're paying for, and what you're using it for would be tremendously helpful. So thank you for that. So I'll tell on myself a little bit here, Rob. When I was a development director for a nonprofit, when I got there, we really didn't have great software, and we didn't have a way for me to confidently manage our major gift donors. I didn't know what I was putting into it. It wasn't user friendly. I didn't know where it was going, and so what I actually ended up doing was creating my own donor profile sheet. And I had all the essential information about the donor. I had what I knew about their reasons for giving, what they gave to, and I created a folder of our top 25 donors. I had a strategy for each donor, and when it came time to implement that, or when I would have an interaction, I'd pull that folder out, open it up, jot down exactly, okay, here's what happened, here are the next steps, and all this. It was a very manual, old school way of doing it, but 25, that's all I could do. If I had some sort of software to help manage that, I could have done more, but that's sort of my makeshift way that I manage those relationships.
Yeah, that's amazing. Where of the 100 people I've talked to, 100 plus people over the past 3 months, that's still how a lot of folks do it. Except instead of using a paper notebook, they transition into an Excel spreadsheet. So I've seen a few of these spreadsheets where there's hundreds of rows of donor prospects, and then each column is a task that it needs to be accomplished, and then all the columns related to relationship data. So it's something really interesting where there's a failing of databases. It is a failing of data, essentially, where folks have to create their own systems. And in my hope is that we can develop something that streamlines all of this more in a system way. So you can do all your outreach in one place, all your cultivation in one place. And then the benefit is that instead of each staff being able to manage 25 major donors, you can actually manage 100, 150. So it becomes a lot more efficient.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Rob. So yeah, so we know software is a big challenge for many organizations. And if you're looking for a starting point of, okay, well, what should we measure? There are a few sort of foundational metrics that most nonprofits should be measuring, and it doesn't require a big complicated software to measure. You should be able to measure the total amount that you raise every year. And I have to add this part in there with clear parameters, because what one organization may call this is the total amount of money we raise may not be the same, may not include the same ingredients as another organization. One may include in-kind gifts for in their total amount raised. One may not. One may include, if you have an endowment, one may include money that gifts that people make to an endowment. Others may not. So when you report on the total amount that your organization is raising or has raised in the previous year or years, make sure that you're very clear and consistent what that consists of and what it does not consist of. And when you report that information, especially to your board and development committee, be very clear what exactly that includes. Number of donors, it's a pretty self-explanatory one. And if you know how much you're raising and you know how many donors you have, it's pretty easy to calculate what the average gift size is to your organization. And lastly, your donor retention rate. I was browsing the chat earlier when Rob, you were talking, and I know someone mentioned donor stewardship. Donor retention is a good metric to use to see how well you're stewarding your donors. Donors that are well stewarded will continue to give year over year. So be sure that you're calculating what percentage of your donors you're retaining on an annual basis. The last thing I'll say about the data that you use is don't just think short-sighted. Don't just think about what you want to measure today. And when you think about 2023, don't just think about what do we want to measure in 2023. Think about what you might want to measure 3 to 5 years from now. What are the things that you want a multi-year analysis of? What might you want to know in a few years? And start tracking it sooner rather than later. So you want to know exactly what you're doing now, what you want to measure next year, and you also want to take a longer term approach. What do we want to measure, and what do we want to know 3 to 5 years from now? Oh, let's see. Okay, the next common gap that I see is having an incomplete annual fund development plan. So what a great time to do this webinar and talk about development plans as we're in the fourth quarter of 2022. If you're operating on a calendar year, this is a really good time for you to start assessing what you've done in 2022. I know a lot of you have year-end campaigns that you're working on. You've got letters going out. You have campaign goals that you're trying to hit. It's also important to build in time during the fourth quarter to start planning what your annual fund looks like for next year. So why is that an issue? Well, one time, and we talked about that, but I want to talk about specifically what I don't find in annual fund development plans. Now, one, if you don't have one, you should get one, right? So one, if you don't have a plan, you need a plan. And there are so many good resources out there about how to write a plan, what the components are. I mean, that's its own webinar. Books have been written, speeches have been given. So we won't go into great detail about all of those issues because there are so many good resources out there. There are two things that I want to talk about that I find missing in most development plans. It is development operations and how you manage major gift relationships. So when it comes to development operations, it's easy to overlook. It's a lot of work that's not external. It's a lot of work that goes unseen, but it is essential into the success of a development office. James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, has this great quote that you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the levels of your systems. And when I read that, like, I immediately felt it, because I've been there. You have all these goals and you're trying to reach it. You can't quite reach it because what's holding you back is the infrastructure and the systems or the lack of systems that you have in place. When most people are writing their annual fund development plans, they're thinking about the external piece, how much money they have to raise, the events that they're going to have, the solicitation letters they have to send, the newsletters. They think about all these things, but very few organizations build into their development plan the investments that they need to make in their own operations. So if you're struggling with your software and you need to take an inventory, or if you have inaccurate or data in your database, if your list needs a good cleaning and that's a priority for you next year, be sure to build those into your annual fund development plan, because what doesn't get measured, or what you measure is what gets done, right? I think that's the same. What you measure gets done. So I always found that if I didn't put anything operational in my annual fund development plan, it wouldn't get done. And if it did, we made a plan for it and it got done. Yeah, talking about or building in your development operations into your annual fund development plan is also a great training opportunity for your board members and your development committee members. I didn't do that intentionally when I first started doing it. It was to make sure that we paid attention to some important infrastructure that needed attention when I was a development director. What I found was it allowed me to teach some of our development committee members and our board members some of the complexities and the sophistication of what we're doing. I know many of you on here and that watch this have board members and development committee members that just think fundraising is sending letters and going asking your friends and family for $200 or $100 or whatever they can give. And by building the infrastructure and the operations into the development plan, when we worked with that with board members and development committee members, I could see their eyes open and light bulbs go off in their mind going, oh, this is as we say, there is a science to fundraising. It allowed them to see the science and the strategy behind the work that we were doing. So building operations in your annual fund plan is very important. And like I said, the second is build into your annual fund major gift relationship building. A lot of people build into their development plans how they're going to ask for annual major gifts. If you have a gift club, some sort of a donor society, a lot of development plans will say, we have this brochure that we're going to mail. We're going to hand deliver these. We're going to ask these people face to face. We're better at mapping out the asking part of that. What we're not as good at doing is building in a strategy for how we maintain those relationships when we're not asking. How are we communicating with these donors when the ask is not in the room? And like I mentioned earlier, I've done it a number of ways. When my annual fund development plan, I would identify what a major gift is to our organization. And that's a question that you all should know. And if you don't, define it. What is a major gift to your organization? When I was a development director, we were a pretty large nonprofit, but we defined it as a gift of $2,500 or more annually. So that was how we defined a major gift, in addition to donors that gave one-time major gifts for an endowment or to set up a charitable lead annuity trust or something like that. So make sure that you define what a major gift is for your organization. Pull a report of all the people that fit that description now and over the past 3 years. It's people that used to be major gifts that may not be giving at that level anymore, and build it into your development plan, not only how you're going to ask, but how you're going to intentionally communicate with those donors on a monthly basis, where you're not always asking for money. So those are two things that I would encourage you to build in your development plan. And when it comes to how you go about writing your annual fund development plan, that's again another topic that with a lot of resources out there. But here's my advice in that I'll share today. When I would write a development plan, I found this to be very helpful. And that is, I would have a starting point. We need to evaluate what we've been doing over the course of the year, and which requires some good data, but do the best you can to evaluate what you've done and prepare some preliminary goals and priorities for your leadership. And what I would do is, after I had my information and my recommendations and my thoughts together, I would sit down and visit with our CEO and go over exactly what we did and what my recommendations are. And what we would do is we would align our goals and priorities. And once we had our goals and priorities outlined for the next year, it was much easier to build a plan of our strategies and our timeline. What a lot of organizations do is the complete opposite. We start with the strategies that we've been doing, and we say, okay, here's what we're going to do next year, and then here's what we think our goals can be. It starts at the bottom and it works its way up. And that's a really good way to keep doing the same things that you do every year. It sort of perpetuates that cycle. And what we found was very helpful was start at the top and work your way down. Start by aligning goals and priorities with the leadership. Make sure you're on the same page there. And then it becomes much more clear what the right strategies are to help achieve those goals in the upcoming year. And the last thing that we'll talk about as a common gap uncovered in an audit is an underutilized development committee. And again, something else you can take a deep dive on, a lot of great resources out there to help enhance and engage your board and development committee members. Why do we find that so many development committees are underutilized? Time, again, there's that thing, time. We just don't have time to strategize and build a plan around them. Fear, we're afraid of what they might say. We're afraid of what ideas they might share, and we're not prepared to say no. Even worse, we might afraid to say yes, and now we're stuck with maybe a bad strategy. And we don't know that it's the right return on the investment. All the time that we pour into our development committee, how much is that actually going to help us raise? So we question the ROI in that, and sometimes we just don't know what to do with them. We have people and we go, I just don't know what to do with these people. And when you don't know, you don't do. And so there's a lot of reasons why they're underutilized. And I'll have 2 tips to help sort of get you unstuck. The first is help them remember the role of the development committee. We have turned the development committee into the thank you note committee, to the special event task force, to the bring 2 names to the next meeting committee. And we've turned it into those things, and those have their place, but those actions by themselves is not the role of the development committee. The role of the development committee, if you actually start with the board, part of the responsibilities of the board is to ensure the fiscal health and stability of the organization. The development committee's job is to help pay attention to that critical slice of the pie that is fundraising. And for a lot of nonprofits, a big chunk of their revenue comes from philanthropy, comes from charitable giving. And the development committee's job is to make sure that there are adequate plans and to execute those plans for the organization to have the resources it needs to fulfill its mission and to grow. And we've turned the development committee into these little actions, and we've stripped it the heavy responsibilities away from the committee. So one thing that I did and that I encourage my clients to do is to help remind them the role of the development committee. It's not just a friendly volunteer group. They're there to pay attention to a very important piece of the organization. So remind them of the role. And it adds a level of importance to the chair of that committee and to the members of that committee. And a lot of board members and committee members, they want to be a part of problem solving and engaging in a great discussion. And when you strip it away from some of those responsibilities, all you're left with are just some tasks that board and staff member or committee members may or may not be excited about. Once you help them, remind them of their role, another effective strategy is to teach. I find that the single most effective way to get your development committee more engaged is to teach them what it means to be an effective fundraising organization. It does so many things. When I when I inherited a pretty lackluster development committee, uh, when we pulled everyone back together, one of the things I told them was, I can't recommend a plan to you because you have the responsibility to ensure the fundraising success of the organization. If I just write what I know, if I write a plan and I give it to you and you rubber stamp it, then you don't have any buy-in. And how am I going to expect you to help execute this plan if you don't understand it and you don't understand why it was created or the methodology behind it? So I need to help you understand why this, how fundraising is effective. And when I was able to do that, it created a great discussion. And I told them up front, I said, I'm not going to send you out into the community to ask for gifts until you feel comfortable and you're confident that in these strategies that we have. It developed a great conversation and a great discussion among the committee. And they became more comfortable asking for gifts because they understood why we were doing what we were doing. They understood that we didn't need to have another event to help raise more money. I needed their help building relationships with our current and new donors because that has the highest ROI in raising money for our organization. So you help them make better decisions. The last thing that it really did that sort of was an eye-opener to me was I became the expert in the room. And I've been in those rooms where you have development committees and they're saying all these things, and you have some people that really think they know what they're doing. They've been successful in business. They might be an accomplished CPA. They might know marketing really, really well. And they think they know. But once you take time to train them and you help bring them up to speed with why these are effective strategies and why fundraising works this way, not that way, what you find is a lot of those same people will start to see you as the expert in the room, which you are, which you already are. But when we don't teach, they don't realize that. So when you give them the tools that they need, you find that they start looking to you for some answers. They start asking you questions. And when you make recommendations, they actually listen, and you'll find that they sort of help you better execute your fundraising plan. So teaching has to be built in when you're building a development committee to your agenda. Don't just get them a plan and expect them to execute. Spend the time, invest the time in teaching your development committee and your board. Your board members should all go a certain level of fundraising training, but especially that development committee, invest the time in training and educating them on best fundraising practices. So to summarize the three gaps, I'm checking my time here. So the three gaps that we've talked about today that I see commonly when I conduct a development audit is using the wrong data or no data, inadequate annual fund development plans, and an underutilized development committee. And I hope through through this webinar, you understand why those are some of the issues, and you have some tools and some ideas and some concepts that you can use to analyze. Maybe you struggle with one or more of these gaps, and you have some tools that you can help address those. The last thing we'll talk about, as Rob alluded to, is you don't need to have an annual audit every year. So I'm going to hammer home the physical analogy one more time. You don't need a very thorough physical every year from your physician, but you should see your physician every year, right? There's a reason why people who see their primary care physician on a regular basis statistically are more likely to live longer and healthier lives, because they're constantly evaluating and getting information that they can use to make better decisions. So while you don't need a full audit every year, in the years between your audit, you should have a checkup. And a checkup is something that you can easily do on your own. So before we get to the 7 questions, here are a few things to know going into it. One, have a starting point. That kind of speaks to having a plan to begin with. Make sure that you have a plan and you have a starting point that you can work with. Make sure that you measure and monitor your checkpoints throughout the year. Don't wait till the end of the year to do a full-blown checkup or to start pulling your data. Create an Excel spreadsheet that's broken down by month with your goals in rows, and every month set aside time to evaluate and pull the data. That way, when you get to the end of the year, you're just totaling up the data. You're not having to reach all the way back to February and try to figure out, how did that solicitation do? Make sure you monitor that every year. And you want to set aside several days, maybe even a week, to do a checkup. Now, I know that sounds like a lot. Do we really need a week for a checkup? But think about the data that you have to pull, the thought that you have to put into evaluating what you did. And a lot of times you're reminding yourself what you did last year. That was always a thing. It's like, oh, I totally forgot we did that in March or April. So part of it is evaluating and remembering what you did all year long. And then you want to spend plenty of time gathering information, really thinking about that information. And you may have some people on your team that you want to have conversations with in order to help develop your evaluation of what you've done. And like I said, you may want to meet with your CEO to talk about sort of your preliminary thoughts and recommendations for the end of the year. So it's always great to plan for a little more time and have a buffer. And if you complete it early, hey, you just freed up more time for yourself. So like Rob said, we've developed 7 questions that you can ask in order to conduct your own annual checkup. Each one of the 7 questions is linked to a different area of development and might not be the questions you would think to ask when doing a checkup. Yes, you should do your data. You should know how much you raised that year, the expenses, how much it costs to raise the money that you raised. These are things that you might not think about to ask. Did we effectively engage our board? Did we train them? Did we give them the tools that they needed to succeed? Did each member make a meaningful gift to the organization, meaningful to them? I don't recommend having a set amount for each board member to give, but I do recommend that each board member makes a gift that is meaningful to them. Did we regularly monitor and achieve the benchmarks laid out in our plan? Why or why not? And has something significant happened that would cause us to reconsider our goals or what we measure? Maybe there was a transition in leadership. Maybe you tried something brand new this year that didn't work, or maybe you had a new idea that you're going to implement next year. Has something significant happened that would cause us to reconsider our goals and what we measure? What new programmatic data do we need? In fundraising, we don't just live in a bubble. Our department doesn't live and operate just with links to the executive director and the board and the committee. You need really good programmatic data from your organization. How much does it cost to put a student through our program? There's good programmatic data that you need. Do you have what you need? Has there been any changes to the programs that your organization offers? Do we need to amend our corporate case for support? Your foundational donor communication document that helps everyone stay on track, communicate consistently and accurately. Has anything happened that would cause for us to amend our case? Do we have a personalized touch point with major donors on a monthly basis? Build that in. And are we effectively using our database to run reports, track donor engagement, and maintain accurate information? So those are 7 questions to ask in addition to some of your basic measurements that will help you conduct a good annual checkup in years between audits. So like Rob said, you're going to get this handy dandy piece that lays out those 7 questions for you all, so you don't have to write those down. It's been a pleasure to be here. Rob, thank you for having me. And before we wrap up, I think we have a few minutes to take on any questions.
Yes, thank you, Kenny. I really love the piece about kind of how you can conduct a development audit, when to do it. It doesn't have to happen every year, as well as just this focus on activating your board too, making sure that they're being utilized in a way that they can be helpful to building relationships and empowering the staff to do what they need to do when it comes to fundraising. So really love that piece. We do have a few questions. So one of the first questions is around slides and recording. A lot of people asked about this. So yes, you will get the slides, you will get the recording within the next 1 or 2 days. So we do have your email address on hand. So it will be sent to the email address that folks use to attend this Zoom webinar. So also you'll get that 7 questions worksheet that Kenny just went over. Another question that we have is around from Sheila. For the board, what is the board's role when it comes to executing the fundraising plan, and to what degree?
I don't know that we have time to dive into that, Rob, but I would say, like I mentioned earlier, we get caught up in focusing on all the specific actions and the tasks associated with that we lose sight on the bigger responsibilities of the board. So I would do the same thing like I did with the development committee. Make sure that your board understands what their responsibility is. They are responsible, among other things, for the financial health and stability of the organization. And part of that is to make sure that adequate resources are coming into the organization. You wouldn't do this with any other business. I mean, if you had $1 million business and 48% of your revenue was coming from a source, you would make sure that you have a good plan to have that income coming in. You would monitor it, you would evaluate it, and you would try to grow it as much as you can. It's the same with fundraising. A board's responsibility as they're putting together the budget is to make sure that whatever is in that budget for fundraising, they're ultimately responsible for making sure that that money comes in. And what they need is an expert on staff. That's where we as fundraisers come in. It is our job to help the board and the development committee of the board, help them create the right strategies. I should step back one step before that, to help set the right goals, to help have the right strategies and execute those strategies. So first they have to understand why it's important that they understand this, and what actions they can take is that you want board members to help you build relationships with donors. A lot of the donors are peers of board members and committee members, and you want board members to help bring people to the organization that have an affinity for what you guys do, not just their friends and family. Don't do the, hey, everybody bring 2 names at the next committee meeting. You're looking for people that have an affinity, that have a passion for what you guys do, for the mission of the organization. And you want board members to help bring them into the organization by making an introduction to the CEO or the development director and starting that relationship building process. That's the highest ROI. I mean, that's where board members can really come in handy, in addition to writing thank you notes, but making connections, connecting them with someone on staff at the organization so that they can continue to learn more and really do a lot of the heavy lifting of the relationship building and management.
I think that's a great insight where a lot of board members are underutilized. They're in a committee, they kind of do the nitty gritty, but when it comes to fundraising, I do think that like-minded people in similar accomplishments do attract each other. So I think board members typically are quite accomplished, and they will know people or have access to folks who may share a similar disposition as them. So they make great referrals to major gifts or just to donors in general. So I really love that.
Yeah,
Another
and
question.
that's where training comes in. I'll
Yeah.
do one more plug for training. If you just ask them to do tasks and to open doors, uh, you're going to find yourself, beating your head against a wall because they don't quite know why they're doing it, what you're going to do with it. They don't understand the rationale and like we said, the science behind why this is an effective strategy.
Mhm.
So with the right training, you can build their comfort level up to a place where they are, in some cases, eager to make the introduction because they know what's going to happen. They know the process, they're comfortable with it, and then they do it.
Yeah, yeah. So I think having a strong process and helping the board member understand how to move folks down the line through different stages is really important, but also keeping track of it too. So one of the findings that I've been seeing from my research is around just this huge gap with tooling. Board members have a desire to help with fundraising, but they don't have the right tools and the processes and the templates in place to help make them effective. So I do think matching tooling with great software, with education and process is a great approach to solving that problem.
Mhm.
Great. Another question that we have is from Nancy. So this is more of a clarification where when we're talking about an annual development plan, it's not just a plan for the annual fund. Is that correct? And what are some of the differences?
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so I guess the question is asking, does your annual development plan, this audit that you're doing, is it specific to the annual fund or is it more all-inclusive about all the fundraising that happens?
Yeah, so an audit is all inclusive. An audit, again, is customized for the organization, but it examines all the components that go into fundraising effectiveness. And that is everything from how engaged is your board, all the way down to, do you have the right policies in place? Things like a gift acceptance policy. If your organization has an endowment, do you have the adequate endowment policies in place? So an audit really examines every piece critical to your fundraising efforts, which a lot of that is included in your annual fund plan. Does that answer the question, Rob? Okay.
Yeah, I do think so. And I want to move on since we only have a few more minutes.
Mhm.
So this is a question from Allison. How would you begin engaging the board or introducing the board to the idea of being more involved in the fundraising side of things? So what is the best place to start if the board members aren't assisting with fundraising?
Yeah, making sure that every board member understands. I mean, I love some of it has to do with how you onboard new members. If you have a retreat, which some organizations are doing a retreat at the end of the year, maybe at the beginning of the year. So new board member orientation or an entire board retreat is a good way to start planting those seeds. And again, it's enforcing the responsibility of the board to ensure these adequate resources are being made. So we have, this is the amount of money that we have to raise every year to do X, and making sure that they understand what their responsibilities are as a board to do that. And so the common thing is, how do we get all of our board engaged in fundraising? Well, you're never going to. You're never going to have a board who's entirely made up of people comfortable asking for gifts and with the time to do some donor stewardship. So you want to make sure that within your board, you have the right number of people that that are comfortable making introductions and asking for gifts on behalf of the organization.
Awesome. And I think that's all the time we have for questions. So if folks do have additional questions they want to ask you directly, what is the best way to connect with you, Kenny? Or where can they learn a little bit more about the work that you do?
Yeah, so on the information that you're going to get, it has my contact information. It's got my phone number and email address. Email is just the best way to contact me. It's kenny@kennysigler.com.
Awesome. All right, Kenny, thanks so much for your time today. I'm going to paste in your email address into the chat so folks have it. Thanks so much for everything that you shared about. I think we just spent the last 15 minutes talking about board of fundraising. So I think you can do a whole session around that in itself. So we should chat about that soon. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Again, you will be getting the slides, the cheat sheet with the 7 questions, as well as recording to this webinar later tomorrow. So look forward to that. We do have a lot of other resources on the deck for the rest of November, including a few webinars on Giving Tuesday, and then moving on into fundraising planning for 2023. So super excited. Look out for those emails, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.